Judge, would you like me to take roll?
Yes, please.
All jurors are present.
Go ahead and bring them in and directly back out to the court.
Yes, ma'am. Jury. Jury. Jury may be seated.
Anyone else may be seated? Mr. Wells, the state's next witness.
State calls Amy Seward. Seward. It's S-I-E-W-E-R-T.
Follow me, please.
Raise your right hand this morning and turn around. You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Swear this.
All right, good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Sorry about the delay there, I was trying to find everything. Could you tell us your name, please?
I'm Amy Seward, assigned EWERT.
And where are you currently employed?
I'm employed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Orlando Regional Crime Laboratory.
And what position do you hold within the Florida Department of Law Enforcement or Orlando Regional Crime Laboratory?
I am a crime laboratory analyst assigned to the firearms section.
What does that mean?
My primary duties are to examine firearms for function, as well as examining fired ammunition components to determine whether they've come from a particular firearm.
What particular qualifications do you have to hold a position such as that within the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry. In addition, I have undergone approximately 2 years worth of hands-on structured training in the area of firearm identification, cartridge case and projectile comparisons, firearm operating systems, assembly, disassembly, as well as serial number restoration and distance determination on clothing.
Ms. Seward, how long have you been employed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in this capacity?
I have been in the firearms section for 10 years.
And in your 10 years with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, how many times have you been called upon to examine firearms, their components, or fired ammunition, so to speak, and then required to testify as to your results?
I have completed hundreds, if not thousands, of examinations over hundreds of cases. I have testified over 25 times in the courts.
Each time have you been qualified as an expert within the state of Florida and the court in which you appeared?
Yes.
Were you called upon to conduct any analysis with respect to a shooting that occurred at 13 Aspen Drive, Daytona Beach, Florida, on or about October 29th of 2011?
I'm unsure of the address, but
Okay, but that sounds familiar?
yes.
And you were involved by the Volusia County Sheriff's Office to become involved in this case?
Yes.
Tell us, please, what was submitted to you for testing and for what purposes?
I received 26 fired cartridge cases. I received probably around 10 or so bullets and fragments of 2 different calibers. I received 2 firearms initially and a third at a later date. And I believe I also received 1 unfired cartridge.
Okay. I'm going to come up there with a bunch of evidence and go through it with you for just a minute, okay? No. I'm going to start with the ballistic evidence and we'll get to the guns later, okay? I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 24. Is that the unfired cartridge that you received?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and how do you know that that's the unfired cartridge that you received?
I can see it through the BB bag, and I also recognize it by the FDLE case number, exhibit number, and my initials.
Very good. I'll show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 17. Ask you to recognize this item when it's out of container.
I do.
What do you recognize it to be?
This is an item that contains projectiles and fragments.
Okay, 8 number specifically.
Yes.
And again, thanks to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, you see your seals and signatures affixed to the bag.
Correct.
I'll show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 16. Do you recognize that exhibit?
I do.
And how do you recognize that?
Again, the FDLE case number, exhibit number, and my initials.
And what do you recognize that to be?
This is listed as containing 13 fired cartridge cases.
Specifically from a 223 caliber, or excuse me, specifically of a 223 caliber.
Yes.
I'll show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 15. Would you recognize that exhibit by its out of container?
I do.
And what do you recognize it to be?
13 fired 9mm Luger caliber cartridge cases.
And again, your seals and signature affixed to the outer container.
Correct.
Can I ask you about State's Exhibit M and State's Exhibit NN? Do you recognize those 2 items?
I do.
And how do you recognize them?
FDLE case number, exhibit number, and my initials.
And do you recognize those to be projectiles or fragments that were retrieved at autopsy, according to what you knew.
Yes.
And of course, you weren't at autopsy,
No.
and you relied upon somebody else to collect those items and submit them to you.
Correct.
For your analysis, I don't think we need to open any of those containers, but I would like to talk with you about it. And so before we do, I'd like to talk with you about the firearms that were submitted to you in this particular case. Tell us what was submitted to you. You said first it was 2, and then later it was 1 additional firearm?
Yes.
Okay, tell us what was submitted first.
Initially, I received a 9mm Luger caliber Sig Sauer Model P226 semi-automatic pistol and a magazine. I also received a .223 Remington caliber Ruger Model Ranch rifle, semi-automatic rifle, and magazine.
I'm approaching you with what's been marked as states 11 and states 12. These items have already been opened, but I want to confirm that this is in fact the 9mm pistol number 11 that you received at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and it's in the same condition as when you received it.
Yes, it is.
And does the box have your seals and signatures affixed to the outside?
It does.
And in fact, there are packages inside here that were created by you.
Correct.
I'll show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 12. Is this the ranch rifle that you discussed?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Again, your seals and signatures are on the exterior of the package.
Yes.
And the gun is in the same condition as when you last saw it.
Yes.
And there are manila envelopes in here that were created by you when you were testing.
Yes.
And then what was the other weapon that you received?
I received a 12-gauge Winchester Model 1200 pump action shotgun.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 19. Ask if you've seen the seals and signatures on the outside of the box.
Yes,
That these are in fact your seals and signatures.
they are.
Did you recognize the weapon inside?
Yes,
So standard, it's the same or substantially the same condition as when you last saw it?
it is.
And again, has manila envelopes inside as a result of your analysis done with this weapon.
Yes.
Okay. So you can see it got jammed up in the box there. Another you would hold a pistol at this time. When the firearms section of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement receives a submission such as you've described to us and announced there with those items, tell us the procedure by which that submission comes to you.
The case is assigned by my supervisor to me, at which point I will request the evidence from the case from our evidence section. I will pick it up and it will remain in my custody throughout my examination. Once I am complete with my examination, I will return it back to the evidence section, which will return it to the contributing agency.
Okay, and what exact analysis was requested of you with respect to the pistol before you and the ranch rifle that I've just taken away from you?
Examining the firearms for function as well as comparing them to the fired ammunition components that were found on the scene.
Let's start with the pistol, if you don't mind. Would you pull it out for us? It's cleared and safe, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Talk with us a little bit about the mechanics of that particular gun, how it's loaded, how it's fired, how you fire it multiple times.
This is a semi-automatic pistol. It is fed by a magazine. A magazine essentially is a container for cartridges, and you'll load the cartridges one on top of each other. And they are under spring tension. That is inserted up into the magazine well. To chamber your first cartridge, pull back on the slide, And then upon releasing, it will take that top cartridge from the magazine and insert it into the chamber. At this point, the only thing you need to do to fire the pistol is to pull the trigger. Pulling the trigger will detonate the cartridge that's in the chamber, pushing the bullet down and out the barrel, extracting and ejecting the fired cartridge case. And on the travel forward, the slide will take the top cartridge again from the magazine and load it into the chamber. So that for every successive shot, you only need to pull the trigger until the magazine is empty.
So after you've pulled the slide back and put the first magazine in, or excuse me, put the first cartridge into the chamber, in order to make the gun go boom, all you have to do is pull the trigger.
Correct.
And each time you pull the trigger, it goes boom until there are no cartridges left.
Yes.
And that's what the purpose of the spring feed is in that magazine, that each time that that gun is fired, a new cartridge is pulled automatically into the chamber of that weapon.
Yes.
Any safeties on that weapon?
Yes.
How is the safety?
It has a decock safety, which by pushing this down will take the hammer and safely lower it without contacting the firing mechanism.
And if the safety is on, what do you have to do to put that first cartridge into the chamber?
This does not have any external safeties.
Okay. And so, what
With-
makes that gun safe then?
With a cartridge in the chamber, you can press the decock and it's still safe. It will lower it with the hammer not touching the firing mechanism. In addition, there's also a firing pin block on the inside of this where it will block the firing pin from going forward unless the trigger is pulled. So it will prevent that connection. Even if the hammer were to hit the back of the firing mechanism without the firing pin block disengaged, it will not fire.
So essentially then, if the decock lever is not employed and a cartridge is in the chamber, pulling the trigger makes the gun go boom.
Yes,
And will always make the gun go boom until it runs out of ammunition.
correct.
Okay. Go ahead and put that weapon down and let's talk about the mechanics of the range rifle. Go ahead and take the rifle out and talk with us about the mechanics of that weapon, if you would. Whether there are any safeties, how it is that the gun is discharged, what it requires to put a cartridge into the chamber.
This, similar to the pistol, is magazine fed. You'll load cartridges one on top of another into the magazine. Insert into the magazine well here. Unlike the pistol that has the slide where that whole top piece moves, this has a bolt, which is this piece right here with the bolt handle. And you pull back on this and release. And as it is going forward, similar to the slide, it is going to take the top cartridge from the magazine, insert it into the chamber, and to fire, all you have to do is pull the trigger. And again, pull the trigger each time as long as there's a cartridge loaded from the magazine into the chamber.
Let me talk with you about that, just break it down a little bit further. You load the magazine up one at a time with ammunition.
Yes,
You slide the magazine up into the well.
correct.
You pull the bolt to bring the first cartridge up into the chamber.
Yes,
You pull the trigger, it goes boom.
yes.
It continues to go boom just by pulling the trigger.
Each time you pull the trigger, correct.
The gun automatically feeds in the next cartridge into the chamber,
Yes,
as long as there are cartridges left.
yes,
And every time you pull the trigger, it goes boom.
yes,
Any way to make that weapon safe?
yes. This has a manual safety on the front of the trigger guard. And it can be pushed backwards, and that will prevent the trigger from moving. And that's an external manual safety.
So unlike the pistol, that truly does have an external manual safety,
Yes,
rather than just a decock lever. That has an actual safety that has to be turned off before the gun can be fired.
correct.
if there's a cartridge in the chamber, can the safety be employed?
Yes.
And it will always be safe.
Yes.
But once the safety is turned off, pulling the trigger makes it go boom.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. With respect to both the ranch rifle and the 9mm that are before you, what's the capacity of those weapons?
Each of these came with higher capacity magazines. The pistol had a capacity of 18, and it had an additional extension on it to hold 2 more. So it would hold a total of 20 cartridges in the magazine and 1 in the chamber, if it were to be fully loaded. The rifle has a capacity of 20. I was able to fit 21 into it, and it would cycle. So for that particular rifle, I was able to fit 21 in the magazine and then 1 in the chamber. So fully loaded, it would be able to have 22 cartridges.
And so potentially the person holding the holding the 9mm could pull the trigger 21 times and have 21 separate shots fired.
Yes.
And with the rifle, they could pull the trigger 24 times and have 24 separate shots fired.
22.
22. Sorry. Now, before you on the table there are some shell cases and fragments that you said were submitted as well, and also complete projectiles, correct?
Yes.
Did you make any comparisons with respect to those ballistic items to the weapons that are there in front of you?
I did.
Before we get to the comparisons that were made, tell us about the functionality testing that was performed on each of these weapons.
I did a standard firearms exam to make sure that the firearms were in proper working order, that they were safe to test fire, that there were no cracks or bulges in the barrels, that everything looked to be safe. I then, using laboratory ammunition, test fired the firearms into a water tank, so I could retrieve the bullets as well as the fire cartridge cases for comparison.
And what did you find with respect to the workings of these particular firearms? Were they in full working order?
Yes, both of them were functional.
Any defect to either of the weapons?
No,
Any problem firing?
no.
What was the trigger pull with respect to each of the items?
May I refer to that report?
Sure.
The trigger pull on the rifle was between 4 3/4 and 5 pounds. And the trigger pulls on the pistol were between 3 1/4 and 3 1/2 pounds single action, and 9 and 9 1/2 pounds double action.
Explain to us what it means first with respect to the rifle when you talk about a trigger pull and you measure it in pounds.
That's the amount of pressure needed to be applied rearward to the trigger in order to release the firing mechanism.
To make the gun go boom.
Correct.
Someone would have to put their finger on the trigger and pull with that amount of force to make the gun expel a bullet.
Yes.
Tell us about the pistol and what single and double action is. Help us with that.
The pistol, this goes along with the decock lever that's present on it. Single action is when the hammer, may I pull this out?
Please.
This back here is the back spur of the hammer, and with the hammer back like this and the slide going forward,
There you go.
when you pull the trigger, all you're doing is releasing the firing mechanism. When it's double action, by using the decock lever, it's going to take the hammer and bring it back up to its resting point. Now, by pulling the trigger, it's going to take extra force because pulling the trigger will both cock the hammer and then release it. So it's doing 2 actions, so it's going to be a little heavier, a little harder to pull it.
When the gun has been fired multiple times, is it in single or double action phase?
It's in single action.
And in fact, when the gun is fired, the slide coming back and forth recocks the gun, so it's in single action, and only the minimal amount of force needs to be applied in order to make the weapon fire.
Correct.
So your first shot, maybe you cock it, maybe you don't with your thumb.
Yes.
Single or double action could go either way.
Yes.
Your second, third, fourth, fifth, all the way up to your 13th shot is going to be single action.
You're able to use the decock, but it will, with the slide cycling, will put it in single action. So if you wanted to shoot in double action, you would have to press it down on the decock lever.
Which is quite a bit of actual mechanical work with your hand
Yes.
manipulation. Talk with us about your findings with respect to the 9mm and to the shell cases associated with the 9mm from the scene.
I was able to identify all 13 of the 9mm fired cartridge cases to the Sig Sauer.
So all 13 of them, you could say, had been in that gun or fired from that gun.
They have been fired in the gun.
Talk with us about the cartridge cases from the .223 caliber cartridge cases with respect to the Mini 14 range rifle.
I was able to positively identify one of the cartridge cases as having been fired in the rifle. 2 could have been fired in it. However, there weren't enough individual characteristics present on the cartridge case itself to conclusively say it came from that. And I had an additional 7 that were identified as having been cycled through or ejected from the rifle.
Okay, so you've got one that you can say for sure was fired from that rifle.
Yes.
You've got 2 that you can say possibly fired from that rifle. Or am I confusing that?
No, I misspoke. It's 1 that
Okay.
I could have been.
Okay, and then you've got 7 more that went through that rifle before they, in some way, shape, or form.
Yes, and then 4 that were completely inconclusive.
Tell us what you're looking at when you make these kinds of determinations about cartridge cases, how they're fired from one weapon, how they're not, what you're seeing, and how you can make a determination that it went through the weapon as opposed to being fired from the weapon.
As I am looking at the cartridge cases, I'm looking at marks left from the process of firing or the process of cycling. Now, typically, what I will look at first is marks that are left either by the firing pin indentation or from the primer being pushed up against the breech face of the slide or bolt. And those leave unique marks. If those aren't present, I will look for marks that could come from inside the chamber, because as the cartridge is being fired, there are rapidly expanding gases that are pushing along the entire circumference of the cartridge case, in addition to pushing the bullet out the barrel and pushing the fired cartridge case back against the bolt or the breech face. Now, if I am not able to find any marks of value from looking at those areas, as the cartridge case is being pushed out, it's hitting an ejector. And when it hits that ejector, there's an impression mark that's formed. Sometimes it is of enough evidentiary value that I can look at it and compare it, sometimes it's not. For those 7, I was able to look at those and conclusively say that they were ejected from that rifle.
Okay, so with respect to the 13 9mm shell cases, you can tell us for sure that they came from that gun.
Yes.
And with respect to the Mini 14 and the 13 .223 cartridge cases, you can tell us that 7 of them went through the gun and that 1 was fired from the gun.
Yes.
Conclusively.
Yes.
The others, you have some difficulty with marking.
Correct.
Every gun's a little different. Some guns are good markers, bad markers.
Yes.
As far as the stria that you're looking at,
Yes.
the scratching, that kind of thing.
Correct.
Talk with us a little bit about the projectiles and fragments that were submitted to you. Let's talk first about the ones in the manila envelope, the ones not from
autopsy?
Not from the autopsy, the ones gathered from the garage.
Okay. I received several bullets and jacket fragments of, some I was able to tell caliber, some I wasn't, depending on the size of the fragment that was left, or if the bullet was intact, I was able to tell what was a certain caliber.
When you're talking about fragments, what are we talking about for size and condition of a fragment?
Small pieces of metal, you're talking probably anywhere from a centimeter, some are slightly larger, most of the time they're less. They're small pieces of metal. Some of them have rifling on them. It's marks that I can compare. Some of them just are pieces of jacketing that have nothing to compare on them.
Okay, so when Dave DeWeese went through the carport there, he found pieces of metal, sometimes as small as a centimeter, and
Yes,
submitted to you those pieces of metal for analysis.
correct.
And some of those are even too small to be analyzed.
Some of them don't contain rifling on them, which is what I'm looking at for comparisons.
Were you able to make any kind of match, or can you tell us anything about whether they came from either of the firearms before you?
I was able to identify 3 bullets and a jacket fragment to the pistol. I was able to, the rest were inconclusive. I do actually have a jacket fragment and a bullet that could have been fired from the rifle, but again, there was not enough markings to conclusively say that they were from the rifle.
And so of the 8, you've got 3 that came from the pistol, most likely.
3 that came from the pistol and a jacket fragment that came from the pistol conclusively.
Conclusively. And of the 8, you have several others that could have come from the rifle.
Correct.
Let's talk about the 2 rounds that were collected at autopsy, or the fragments thereof. What were your findings with respect to those items?
The bullet could have been fired from the rifle, but again, I did not have enough individual characteristics present to conclusively say that it was from the rifle. It was definitely not from the pistol.
Okay. When you say that it's definitely not from the pistol and that it could have been from the rifle, what are the things that you're looking at with respect to a bullet to make that determination?
I'm looking at the caliber, the size of the bullet. I'm looking at the rifling, which are the helical grooves that are inside the barrel that impart the spin to the bullet. Those markings from the rifling are imparted onto the bullet. And gun to gun have different measurements of how wide the landing groove widths are, how wide the lands and grooves, which are the helical spin. That is something that I can look at in addition to the number of lands and grooves that are present. That varies from firearm to firearm.
And what you can tell us from looking at that particular bullet and making these considerations is that it definitely did not come from the 9mm.
Correct.
Okay. And do you recall where or which item that was that you in front of you?
My item 9.
Your item 9.
Yes.
So this one is marked as State's Exhibit MM, and the outer label says the projectile from the chest from autopsy. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so this bullet itself did not come from the 9mm.
Correct.
Okay. Let's talk about MM, the one retrieved from the lower leg at autopsy, according to the sticker on the outside.
This is a piece of lead, and it had no value for comparison purposes.
Can't tell us which gun it came from.
No.
Could have been the 9, it could have been the Mini 14.
Yes.
We collect these items from you. We'll talk about the shop. anything that you did tested or examined? Place before you item number 19. This is the shotgun, right?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead and take that weapon out, and we're going to talk about the analysis that you conducted as well as the mechanics of the weapon.
All right, I performed a standard firearms exam on this, similar to the other ones to determine if it appeared to be functional, if it was safe to test fire, and then using laboratory ammunition to test fire the shotgun.
And what did you find with respect to that analysis?
The shotgun was functional.
What did you find with respect to the trigger pull?
The trigger pull was found to be between 5 3/4 and 6 pounds.
Any other comments that are worth discussing regarding the function of that particular firearm? Now let's talk about its mechanics.
This has a tubular magazine at the bottom right here. And to load it, pull this forward. And right in here is where you'll insert shot shells. And similar to the other magazines, this is also spring fed. So you'll load shot shells in here. But what's different from the other one is you pull back on the slide, or pull back on the pump. That'll load the first shot shell from the magazine into the chamber. I can't pull it all the way to this, but it'll load it into the chamber. All you'll have to do at this point is to pull the trigger to fire. However, this has a manual action. To extract and eject the fired shot shell, you have to pull back on the pump. And at this point, by pulling back on this, it will extract and eject.
Where does it, show them where it extracts and ejects the fired shell.
Comes out of this ejection port right here.
Okay. And that's after the gun has been fired.
Correct. After the gun is fired, the user, by pulling back on the slide, will manually extract and eject.
And when you pull back on the slide, does anything else happen?
It will load the next shot shell from the magazine as you pull it all the way back and push it all the way forward.
Okay, so the next shotgun shell will come up into the chamber to be fired.
Correct.
Okay. And again, if you repeat the process, pull the trigger, it causes the shotgun shell to explode. It blows the birdshot or buckshot out the end of the barrel. You have to pull the slide back to eject the shell, put it back forward, and it pulls the next one in.
Correct.
And each time you have to manually go through that process of sliding is it the slide?
The pump.
The pump. You have to slide the pump each time to bring a new shotgun shell into the chamber to be fired.
Yes.
What is the maximum capacity of that weapon?
Per the manufacturer literature, it will fit 4 shot shells in it and 1 in the chamber if it has a restrictor plug removed. Due to federal migratory bird regulations, which I learned all about this because I did not know this beforehand, you can only put 2 shot shells in the chamber as sold by the manufacturer.
Excuse me, you said chamber.
Yes.
Did you mean
So
inside?
sorry, inside the magazine.
Okay.
However, the manufacturer in their literature lists the steps to remove the plug, so it's a very common thing to do to increase the capacity. This restrictor plug that's put in there is only for federal migratory bird regulations, so that is something that can be removed very easily and readily. So it can vary either 2 in the magazine, 1 in the chamber with the plug present, or remove 4 in the magazine and 1 in the chamber with it removed.
And in this case, was there a plug in that gun?
I did not perform that examination on this.
If there was a plug in the gun, the maximum capacity would be 3.
Correct.
If there was not, it would be fired.
Correct.
Does that gun have a safety mechanism?
It does.
Could you show it to us and tell us how it is employed?
It's called a cross-bolt safety, and it's located right here. And this is a manual safety. You push it to either side. And what that does is it'll block the trigger mechanism so that when it's engaged, pulling the trigger won't do anything. The trigger will remain stationary.
And is there a way to indicate whether or not it's engaged?
Yes, there's a red right here, which indicates if you can see the red, it's going to be on fire. And if it's over on this side, there's nothing here, it indicates that it's unsafe.
So it's red for fire, black for safe.
Yes.
Let me talk with you about how one might determine whether a shotgun had been recently fired. What are some examinations that a field crime scene investigator could employ, in order to determine whether the gun had been recently fired?
This is something that I also do in my casework. You shine a light down the barrel and then look inside to see if there are any residues inside.
And by residues, what do you mean?
Could be gunpowder, could be rust, could be dust, lint, any number of things.
What is the presence of those residues, gunpowder, dust, rust, lint? What would the presence of those items within the barrel indicate?
Seeing gunpowder in there indicates that the shotgun had been fired. It doesn't indicate that it had been fired recently or that it had been fired a while ago. Unless it's cleaned, the inside bore of a shotgun is generally dirty. The presence of rust, again, that can be any number of reasons. That doesn't indicate one way or another whether a gun's been fired recently.
But lint and dust are different.
Yes.
Okay, tell us why lint and dust are different in a shotgun shell.
Lint and dust are very light by nature, so that if the shotgun has been recently fired, any lint or dust that was present in the barrel will be blown out with a fired shot.
So it's a good thing for a field investigator to look down the bore of a shotgun and look for lint and dust to determine if that gun has been recently fired.
Yes.
Is it a good idea for a field investigator to field strip the weapon?
No.
Is it a good idea for a field investigator to put anything down the bore of the weapon?
No.
In fact, it's against procedure both for the field investigator and forensics.
In forensic, we prefer that no one puts anything down the barrel before I perform an examination, yes.
And that would be your instruction to every single field investigator everywhere.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination for defendant Wayne Greenlaw, Mr. Nappy.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Seward, you've testified in court about 25 times for the state of Florida, correct?
Yes.
And when your supervisor gives you firearms and objects to be analyzed, does the supervisor tell you what they want done with this stuff? Like, are you told what to do?
No, we have standard operating procedures that when we receive certain items in a case, we'll proceed a certain way so that every time we receive something, we'll go about it in the same manner.
So when you receive a shotgun, in any case, you have certain procedures that you have to follow with that shotgun.
Yes.
Walk me through what procedures you did with the shotgun in this case.
I've performed a standard firearms exam, which meant that I looked at the make, model, serial number, looked at the condition of the barrel, looked at the overall condition of the firearm itself. At that point, I make any type of notes of the make, model, serial number, and write it on a worksheet.
And what did your notes reflect as this stage of your procedure?
That everything was functioning as it was designed.
And did you do anything to the shotgun at this time? Did you put anything into it, take anything out of it, or this is just a visual
This
examination?
is a visual examination and writing the case number, exhibit number, and my initials on the outside of it.
Next, what do you do next?
Next, I went and took laboratory ammunition and test fired the shotgun.
And how many times did you test fire?
It was test fired 4 times.
Why 4?
The first 2 times, the markings on it weren't strong enough to enter into our imaging database. So we test fired an additional 2 times to see if I could get better markings to put into our system.
So after you test fired it, what was the next thing you did with the shotgun?
At that point, I measured the trigger pull on it and imaged one of the fired shot shells into the NIBIN database.
Now the trigger pull on the shotgun measured between, you said, I have it here, 5 3/4 and 6 pounds.
Yes.
Is that what is an industry standard trigger pull?
I don't know if there's necessarily any industry standard, but that certainly falls within the normal range of what I see for most firearms.
So the normal range, would you also call that an average range of trigger pull for a firearm?
Yes.
And is there a specific average range for a shotgun?
Not that I've noted that. I would say in general is within the realm of all firearms that I test.
So when you talk about trigger pulls from a 9mm to an assault rifle to a shotgun, there are no trigger pulls that are specific towards one model, is there, or one make?
No.
That trigger pull on the shotgun, is it high, is it low, where does it fall into the average?
This is, I would say, about the middle of the averages you can get.
Now, after you test fired and measured a trigger pull, what was the next thing you did with the shotgun?
I was done examining the shotgun at that time, and I said I imaged one of the fired shot shells into the NIBIN database.
Did you do any other examination with this shotgun at all?
No.
Did you take it apart, take anything out of it, put anything into it?
No.
With regard to the trigger pull on the rifle, you mentioned, and I assume you did the same procedure with the rifle?
Yes.
So when we get to the trigger pull examination of the rifle, you mentioned that that was between 4 3/4 and 5 pounds?
Yes.
And where does that fall in the average trigger pull for a weapon? And am I stating that correctly, an average trigger pull for a weapon or a firearm?
That's still within the average range.
Is it high or low?
I would say slightly lower than an overall average, but certainly within a normal range that I would see, especially for a single action firearm, which again, for pulling the trigger only releases the firing mechanism.
And what does the low range mean to a user of a firearm? If the trigger pull is
easier.
low, it's easier?
It's easier to pull the trigger.
So the less pressure required makes it easier to pull the trigger,
Correct.
and the more pressure makes it harder.
Yes.
With regard to, let me ask you about the 9mm. The trigger pull on that was between, we have two readings,
Yes.
3 1/4 and 3 1/2 pounds single action and 9 and 9 1/2 pounds double action.
Yes.
How do those trigger pulls fall in the range for a firearm?
They're still within the normal range of what I see.
Is there a cutoff, say at 4 pounds or less for low and 9 pounds or more for higher? I don't know. So is there a cutoff? What are we looking for if you want to say this is low, this is medium, and this is high?
I've seen anything from 2.5 pounds up to 15 pounds. Most of the firearms that I test are somewhere between 3.5 to 10 pounds.
Now, the trigger pull, that comes from the manufacturer.
Yes.
Okay, can an individual manipulate the trigger pull?
It's possible to go into the inner workings of the trigger springs and the mechanics, and it's really involved. It's You are potentially able to switch out springs as long as you know what you're doing.
Was there any evidence or anything on any of these firearms that indicated that they were tampered with or the trigger pull was manipulated?
No.
Now, with regard to the bullet and the bullet fragments, you found 8 of them, and they're listed in your report as 3AA through 3HH.
Yes.
And I just want to be clear, only 2 of those, 3FF and 3HH, could have been fired from the assault rifle. Am I interpreting your report correctly?
Correct.
Now, with this, the safety on the rifle, or the assault rifle, you said, can you show me where that is again?
Where, like, it's next to
Can you show me where the safety is on? If someone wanted to switch that safety on and off, how fast could they do it?